So I want to welcome you guys to the Lean Nonprofit training and to also just let you know a little bit more about what I mean when I talk about Lean Nonprofit. And the reason why I call it nonprofit is because I do focus on mission-based businesses and projects. So nonprofits are typically the groups that I work with, but I can also work with social enterprises. And of course, I think the work that you're doing in trying to recruit and retain more medical doctors to help with medical school training fits really well into that purview as well. Because the work that I do isn't only focused on profit financially, but it is focused on results and making sure that change can occur. So we're going to talk a lot about that through the course of this, the next 7 webinars that we're going to do together. And today I want to give you an introduction and overview over what we're going to be going through and how it's going to work. So in doing that, I'll just introduce you to me. I'm Sarai Johnson. I am the founder of Lean Nonprofit. I also do a podcast now called No Nonsense Nonprofit, where I talk a lot about what you can do to supercharge your nonprofit career or your mission-based career, as well as issues that people face in for-purpose business versus businesses that are just to make a profit. I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, which is kind of exciting, and I've really enjoyed doing it. I love to work with organizations and individuals on achieving mission results. So that's what I always focus on, and that's what we're going to go through here. So Lean for Nonprofits is particularly built upon a specific concept of lean. So there are a lot of different ways that lean has come into play since the 80s when the Toyota way was established and people started to get really excited about lean manufacturing and lean management. There's been a big movement, especially in manufacturing, to implement lean into their work. And lean in that context is really applied to systems and processes that already work. That are already in place and that can be improved upon. It's an idea of continuous improvement. It's an idea of decreasing defects in the process or in the product, and it's a way for you to eliminate waste and inefficiency. So primarily that's really what lean is about, is eliminating waste and inefficiencies. In that context, again, it's applied to processes and systems that already exist. So a few years ago, a man named Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup, which probably some of you guys have read or have heard of at least. And the Lean Startup is awesome because it combines the concept of lean thinking, the elimination of waste and inefficiencies, with the startup mentality of having to be scrappy, think on your feet, and move things forward quickly and see if they work. The idea of fail fast is really deeply embedded into the lean startup ethos, and so that's what I actually use more as a template for working with lean nonprofits. The concept behind the lean startup that I think is so compelling is that startups operate in environments of extreme uncertainty, just like nonprofits do, and just like projects like yours do. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know exactly how it's going to work. You don't know who might be impacted by your work necessarily, but you do need to eliminate waste as much as possible and do things in the most effective and efficient way that you can, because like most organizations that are doing mission-based work, we have constraints on us. So we don't necessarily have unlimited budgets. We don't have unlimited time. We have a real problem that we want to solve, and that problem is usually a critical problem. So in your case, your critical problem is that you're looking to make sure that you have adequate instruction for people who are going into medical school and being able to get community doctors engaged in that. So Lean for Nonprofits is built on that same concept of operating in an environment of extreme uncertainty. And as such, our approach to lean is a little bit different than what you'll see in lean manufacturing, which is more about continuous improvement of existing processes and systems. Ours is more about figuring out a way to build, measure, and learn a minimum viable product from a minimum viable product. So the minimum viable product idea is also sometimes called rapid prototyping in the manufacturing world. It's creating a way for you to deliver a product or service to the people that you're serving, the customers or the clients, or in your case, stakeholders, who will benefit from what you're doing. Then you measure their response, you measure how the product performs, and then you learn from that, and you make decisions about it through delivering a persevere or pivot meeting type format, which we will actually also do. So the build, measure, learn process is what we're going to do together in this webinar series. It's not just for me to deliver information to you, but to actually equip you to go out and create that minimum viable product, learn how you can measure it, and then you will do it, measure it, and then we'll come back together and learn from it a few months down the road. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. This course itself is probably going to be about 75% about building it, building your MVP. So how you're going to build it is going to be based on what I call the mission canvas, which is a tool that I use to help nonprofits to develop programs, minimum viable programs, as well as overall strategic plans for their organizations. And I'll go through that today. You'll get a pretty good overview of it, and you'll be able to see pretty close up what it does and how it works. And then over the next several weeks, we will build in the pieces to that mission canvas as best we can, at least to practice it. And then when you actually do your work with your stakeholders, as you develop the actual MVP that you plan to launch, then you'll have the skills and the information in order to build out that program. The next thing we'll do is have you kind of go off on your own to measure the work. So once you build it and launch it, you will then measure it. So you will keep the records of what you're doing based on what you predetermine are the important metrics for performance, which we'll cover in the mission canvas. And then you'll learn from what you've been doing, and we'll have our Persevere Pivot meetings. So we'll do a series of these meetings for each of your projects so that we can check in and see what's happening, how it's working, is it making improvements as you had thought it would, and if not, what needs to be changed, or if not, what needs to, or if it is working, how is it working and why is it working? So those are the things that we'll talk about when we do that. Ultimately, we'll be covering the full cycle of the lean nonprofit or lean startup type of life cycle. This is the mission canvas. It's a tool that is built on concepts that I borrowed from a couple of other places. Some of you may have seen what is it called? Business model canvas was one great tool that you can use to develop a business model in a one-page format. And there's also a lean canvas, which is a sort of the same idea as the business model canvas, but with lean manufacturing and lean thinking in mind. So I adopted this one to really focus on those mission results that we're most interested in. You'll notice that there are slots for income and expense as well, because even though we're not only in it for the profit, we are definitely looking to create at least revenue neutral programs that can pay all the bills. At best, they should generate revenue in excess of what it costs to run them. That's my personal opinion. But that, of course, isn't always possible depending on the nature of that mission work. Sometimes it is, and so we'll go into how that works. So the mission canvas starts from left and goes to the right, and then it goes down to the bottom line. So the stakeholders is the first group that we'll be looking at, that box. I'll go into more detail on all of these as we go through the rest of this session. Next, we'll talk about problems and solutions that each of your stakeholder groups face. Then we'll talk about activities, where we'll discuss how you're going to provide the solutions that you propose that your stakeholders need or want. Then we'll talk about your competitive edge. Your competitive edge is one interesting topic, I think, because we, in nonprofits anyway, tend to avoid the idea of competition. We pretend like it doesn't exist, or that we collaborate instead of competing, when in reality that's not always true. So we will do some competitive analysis and see where it is most useful for you to compete because you do have the best edge on something and that you're the best at providing a solution. Or it might be more advantageous to you to collaborate with somebody else, or to even concede that to another organization that might do the work better. In your scenario, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to fit in, but you will help me understand that because we'll be doing that work together. So one thing I do want to note is that as we go through the rest of these sessions, it will be really useful to make sure that you can engage with the materials and that you can, you'll be unmuted and you'll participate in doing some of these activities with me in real time so that people can see how they can unfold. And we might use some scenarios that you have in mind for your stakeholder groups to do that. So I will ask you to participate, and I think it'll be a useful experience for you. And I'm really nice, so don't be nervous about that. So the next thing underneath competitive edge is where we talk about outcomes and impacts. Outcomes are individual level change that you would like to see in the population that you're serving or the stakeholder groups that you're looking at. And impacts are a global level or community level change. So an overall change in the system that you're trying to change or in the world, depending on the scope of your work. The next place that we go is to metrics. Now, metrics are where you will record exactly what will show you that the change has occurred for individuals and for the world or for the global impact that you're looking for. This is also the place where we will define what metrics you're going to measure your program against when we're doing our Persevere and Pivot meeting. So we want to know what are the criteria for successful performance for you for your project. Do you want to see a certain number of people retained to do instruction? Do you want to see their longevity increase? Do you want to see their satisfaction increase? What are the kinds of things that you're going to need to understand? And then we'll write about that in our metrics section. And we'll also, in the metrics section, identify how you will measure that. So this is where you keep your records, how you keep your records, where you're going to record things, how you're going to pull that information back out, and how often you'll do reporting and to whom. So we'll do a little bit of work on that front as well. And then the next piece is your value claim. And this part is where you can actually draw out your messaging. So as you're working on your project, you're going to be looking at how can you better communicate with physicians in the communities to be a part of what you're doing. And this is where you can really start to say, hey, this is why we're amazing and awesome and why you should be involved in what we're doing and why it's going to be a benefit to you. And this is a really useful tool as well. I know that a lot of nonprofits actually have a hard time doing this because they can't necessarily quantify their value, but we will work on how to do that. And of course, then we have income and expense down below, and that is an area that is directly tied to the activities section up in the middle at the top. So each of your activities will have income associated with them, potentially, whether it's income that you generate through the activities themselves, or if it's income that comes from a third-party payer, like a grant, which I assume is probably how you're paying for this mostly. And then the expense side would be, how much it costs you to deliver each activity. So that's the overview of how the mission canvas itself works. Now I'm going to check back into my webinar chat really quick just to make sure that there are no questions because I can't see it from where I'm at. Looks like all is quiet on the Western Front, so we'll keep going. All right, cool. So the next piece, we're going to just get into more deep dive on the mission canvas itself. So we're here at the stakeholders piece. Now, the stakeholders are absolutely critical in designing your minimum viable product. This is one of the other reasons that I love the lean startup approach to lean, is that it is absolutely inclusive of customers in a really clear way. So I'm going to use the word stakeholders kind of interchangeably with customers and clients just because I tend to think of organizations from a business perspective, even when I am dealing with nonprofits or education institutes or other groups that are not considered for-profit. So bear with me if that starts to agitate you. I hope it does not. But the reason why it's so cool is because customers and stakeholders often don't even know what they want or need, especially when you're producing something that they haven't been exposed to before or something that's completely new on the market. So if you were to ask a stakeholder exactly what it would be, that would, what would it take to get them involved in what you're doing, they may or may not actually know the real answer for themselves. But by involving stakeholders in the creation and launch and measurement of your minimum viable product, you will be able to observe their behavior. So you'll be able to see what they actually do with what you're trying to accomplish, and you'll actually get their input up front as well, which will hopefully increase their ownership of the result. So a lot of organizations don't always involve stakeholders in this, even though they claim they want to or that they know that they should. So in my past life with my last organization, I was in charge of all of our program development for a lot of years. And I did have some access to my clients at the very beginning because I was doing program development in tandem with my direct service job. So I was working with homeownership clients who were interested in buying a house. They were low-income people typically, and they were not totally sure how they could do that. And so over time, as I got to know my clients, I started to see themes and what they needed, what worked with them, what didn't work with them. So we changed some of the things in our program to make it easier for them to access that. We also added things and took things away just to work it out with the clients because it was in direct response to what they needed. Well, as I grew in the organization and I became more and more removed from actually working day to day with clients, I did find it really difficult to even know where to go with programs because I wasn't engaged with people that I was actually serving. And the best that we could do was make a guess based on what my employees were telling me, or what we were sort of seeing in the community, or what our nonprofit partners and governmental partners would say. In the end, it ended up getting pretty paternalistic because we ended up being a little bit more directive to people about what we thought they needed than what would have naturally arisen from them. So for instance, we got into doing a lot of work on like community food systems, which is a really great area for work and improving the lives of people who don't have access to fresh food or local food. So we had kind of a three-pronged approach to it where we worked with local farmers and vendors to improve their economic well-being. This was an economic development agency that I was working with, just to clarify why I was doing all this random stuff. And we also worked with the clients to help them get better access. And then on a third prong, we had to work with the clients in another way, which was to educate them about the need for what we were providing to them. So it was a little bit unnatural because even if the stakeholders that we were trying to serve, people who didn't have access to fresh, healthy, and local food in our case, because we really wanted to build up the local food economy, we weren't able to ascertain what would have worked for them from them directly, and we ended up just trying stuff and seeing what stuck, and sometimes not ending up actually serving the people that we were intending to serve, but rather contributing to more kind of I'll use the buzzword, the word that will alarm everyone, more contributing to sort of gentrification, just because we ended up attracting people who already had access to food, like at our farmers market, for instance, rather than simply the people that we were trying to serve. So in order to turn that around, we had to get direct contact with our stakeholders, engage them in the process of planning, and help them to help us to understand what would work for them. Ultimately, we wanted to increase their well-being physically, mentally, emotionally, and economically, and so we wanted to find ways to do that. And only way that we could really do that genuinely was by engaging in them and involving them. And of course, where I was in a community economic development setting, that's actually what community economic development is meant to do. But it's very easy to veer off course because you often think, well, I know enough about this to make my best guess and try something and launch it out there and give it to people. When we do that, we're actually doing stuff to people rather than engaging them and allowing them to participate in their own kind of elevation. So stakeholders in this case are going to be really central to you developing a minimum viable product that people will actually try to use, and that you'll hopefully be able to get some results from. And then again, like I said at the very beginning, the most important thing here is observing the behavior of your stakeholders as they engage with what you're providing to them, because you ultimately want to see how they're using your product, if they're using your product, talk with them about why they're not, or what they want, or what would work better for them, as well as seeing what they're actually choosing to do. So the next piece, once you have your stakeholders identified and invited, you'll identify problems that your stakeholders face. So in your case, it'll be a lot of conversation, probably. Let me go back to stakeholders for a second. So I apologize. I actually like to make sure that people know that there are several different categories of stakeholders that are involved in all of this kind of mission-based work. So first of all, you do have your clients and your customers. That's the main stakeholder group that we're going to be focused on. So we'll probably craft most of our problems and solutions and activities around that stakeholder group, which in your case would be community doctors, community-based physicians. The other stakeholders, though, would include, your institution of higher learning that you're associated with, and the students that go to those schools, and funders that are invested in this program, and so forth. So you'll have other stakeholders that you'll involve, that you'll think about, but the ones that you're going to most want to connect with are those stakeholders that will benefit from the product that you're producing. The other groups are usually, I like to include a group that I call power players, which are like policymakers, I do apologize for the background noise. I work on a relatively busy street and my office doesn't have air conditioning, so my window's open. It's really hot today. So, but anyway, we do have the power players, which is like policymakers and funders. They need to be engaged in what you're doing and informed about it, and hopefully kind of involved from the beginning, as well as the people who are receiving the services, because they need to know what's going on. And it's really helpful when you can involve them in seeing what the actual problems are on the ground level. So in nonprofits, which again is really my context, we find a lot of disconnect between what funders think and what is actually happening on the ground. So a lot of foundations or even government funders have an idea in their minds about how things should work or what people need. They're going at it from their assumption of what's going to work for people rather than actually engaging the community. Now, if you're getting funded by one of these funders, you have the opportunity to create that bridge between the real community, the people you're really trying to serve, and the funders and power players. So this is an important stakeholder group to think about including and to understand who they are. I typically suggest that when you develop a set of stakeholders for your project, that you only do up to 6, and I'd keep it down to like 4 if at all possible. If you get more than 6, then you're going to be pretty bulky and it's going to take like 1,000 years for you to get even through just the mission canvas. So if you want to be nimble, I'd say just connect the dots for the bare minimum of stakeholders that you can, while not only focusing on just your customer stakeholder group or the people that you're really trying to serve the most. So there's a little bit of a broader group of people there. So something I just thought of, as we're going, if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box and I will come back to them at the end of this part. So there will be some time at the end to answer questions. And we'll get to that to make sure that you get what you need. So there's the stakeholders piece. Thanks for letting me do a little encore with that. So when we get into identifying problems, of course, like I said at the beginning, we will focus on your primary stakeholder group mostly in this. What do the community physicians need in order to participate in your programs? This, of course, is a great place for you to identify the problems that students in medical school face if they lack community physicians in instruction. So this is another place where you can start to actually identify how problems are interlinked between different stakeholder groups, because that is absolutely the way that it looks, is that you'll have kind of a constellation of, hey, we have this problem for our students and this problem for our physicians. How can we create a way for each of these groups to be compelled by the other group's problems, or find a way themselves to solve those problems, or want to be engaged with that? So identifying problems with the stakeholder groups is really essential, because again, if you're identifying what you think their problems are, you may or may not actually know. You might be completely on the mark and totally hit the right jackpot as far as problems go, but you may miss things, or you may not understand completely what all of their problems are. Identifying problems when you're also like a tacit member of that stakeholder group is a little easier. So in my case, when I used to work with homeownership clients, I had been trying to buy a house as well, and I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I was trying to figure that out for myself too. And it was easier for me to say like, oh, this information or this activity would be really helpful for people in this situation because I know what it's like to be in that situation. Whereas other places are not as easy. So if I were to be working with I've been doing some work with an organization that serves people with disabilities and helps them to do exchange programs and travel abroad. I don't know what it's like to have a disability and want to travel abroad, so I have no idea what their problems are. And this is a place where if I were to plan a project with them, I would need to get their stakeholders in the room to talk about what their problems are. So that's identifying problems. This part, there's a process that we'll go through to identify what those problems look like, and I'll tell you a little bit about how to facilitate that in a group of stakeholders, if indeed that's how you're going to be doing your planning. And then we can kind of go from there. The next piece, of course, is finding solutions to those problems. And this is another place where the stakeholder voice is invaluable, because you might think, oh, you have a problem that looks like this, so I would say a solution probably looks like this. But even if you're a genius, you don't always know the best way to approach a solution or what would be realistic or useful for that group. So engaging them in creatively solving different problems is really valuable for them and for you, because you'll be able to draw out of them ways that maybe they hadn't thought about to solve a problem, make suggestions for it, and then everybody together will come up with more solutions and better solutions than any individual would in a vacuum. So when we're doing solutions, typically in a group with stakeholders, I like to do a process called Blizzard brainstorming. So I'm like addicted to Post-it notes, and you'll find that throughout this process that almost everything I do in the whole mission canvas design is use Post-its or other color coding and things like that. So we'll get into that later. But when you're finding solutions, first of all, when you're identifying problems, you can do the same process. And then when you're finding solutions, same thing. So I usually have people take a pile of Post-it notes that are color coded associated with each of the stakeholder groups, and then they'll write down what all the problems are that they can think of for each of the stakeholder groups, especially their own. So it'll be easier for them to come up with ones that they're personally impacted by. But they might be able to think of others that other stakeholders experience as well. When we're doing finding solutions, we'll do the same thing attached directly to those problems. So say they've come up with 20 problems, you'll then say, okay, so problem 1, let's all think of solutions that could happen for problem 1. You can do this out loud, which is fine, or you can have them each write things down. And depending on your group, one or the other might work better. So it's a little bit about reading your audience and seeing how engaged they might be with a process like this out loud versus writing things down. So I often do kind of a mix of this with groups, but I have found that writing it down engages people who wouldn't normally speak up in a brainstorm scenario because it encourages them to dig deep and think about it. Some people don't always think that they have something to offer to a process, and by encouraging them to know that they definitely do, and a little bit anonymize it by writing it down, it kind of helps get that on the table. So finding solutions is another place. Now, the last thing we're going to do on this front is where we're saying, what are you going to actually do now to solve those problems? So you've got your problems, you've got your solutions. You will then take the solutions that you've identified and then kind of cull them to come up with the ones that you can actually solve yourselves. So this is where you'll then say, this solution to this problem might look like this activity. So we're going to deliver this intervention, or we're going to do this class, or we're going to, provide this training. We'll give people a voucher for blah, blah, blah. So activities are the things you do, the service you deliver, the stuff you're selling, the project you're implementing, right here, directly associated with the problems that you're actually solving. So the solutions that you've identified then will come into play under activities. The activities piece is really important because it will help you understand the scope of your actual project. What you want to do here is identify what you know you can do best, and also what you can feasibly deliver, along again with your stakeholders who can help you prioritize what they think is the most valuable thing for them and their stakeholder group that they're representing. Activities can range from individual, let me start over. So when I think about activities, I think about the depth of a social change intervention. Again, in your case, you're looking at a system that you're trying to change. So I'll kind of give you a little scope of how that looks. But social change happens in a lot of different ways. And some of those ways are a little bit surface area. So we can start with like raising awareness and making people understand that there's a thing that they need to be aware of. This is a problem. The easiest one to point to, of course, is like the Susan Komen Foundation and the ubiquitous pink everywhere in October for breast cancer. So everybody's thinking about it in October because there's pink everywhere. And now we know, that's a thing, breast cancer. Let's remember to be aware of that. This is an interesting one because that example often raises some people's hackles for whatever reason. But raising awareness is essentially letting people know that there is a problem that they need to notice and be aware of. And then the next step after that is delivering group education. So there might be a group of people that, let's imagine that the foundation does more than just raise awareness. They also want to go to community groups and do a presentation and say, this is breast cancer, this is how it can be prevented, et cetera, et cetera. So that's group education. And then from there, you have individual level services. So that's a little deeper intervention, something that will have probably a larger outcome or a more defined outcome because you're now working with individual people. So when you're doing individual level interventions, you're seeing what this individual can benefit from, and you're delivering that and then measuring it and seeing, this made a difference in this person's life. Beyond that, you can do advocacy, and this is where you start to affect policy change, identify ways that you can kind of work on behalf of the stakeholder groups that you're looking at. And then further from advocacy is now influencing systems where you are. So you're a little deeper into that social change piece, and you're looking at influencing a system that currently exists that could be better because it's not working anymore the way that it has worked in the past. So You want to find a way to more engage people in delivering medical education in medical school, and it has been a certain way forever, and now you're trying to change it because you're finding that that model no longer quite works. So identifying ways that you can influence systems is important. And then the next piece is replacing systems. So if there's a system that has become completely obsolete and no longer works at all, this is where now we will look at ways to replace them altogether and do things entirely differently. The next level of social change is like revolution. So we're getting into the like completely radical restructuring and redefinition of, you know, entire societies. And so you can see it kind of escalates really quickly. We're probably not going to get into revolution in this project, I'm guessing, but you might get into, for sure, you're influencing systems, and you may even be in some ways redefining systems. And ultimately, if you find something that really works, maybe replacing aspects of the system that you're working within. So activities will fall into those different categories, and we'll talk about that as we get into activities a little bit more deeply. Competitive edge, woo! Now this is a part of the mission canvas that, as I mentioned at the beginning when I was introducing it, is that it's a little bit interesting for a lot of organizations and nonprofits to do. In your case, it may or may not be a part of what you normally think about, but if you're looking at your stakeholder groups, you're competing for attention and time and effort and devotion and energy and whatever. So you do have to think about how you're lining up against other obligations or opportunities in the lives of the people that you want to engage. So you're looking at your primary stakeholder being community physicians. They have all kinds of demands on them, all kinds of things that they want to accomplish for themselves. And it's going to be up to you to figure out how and why you're amazing and they should be a part of what you're doing. So your competitive edge really defines what you do best, what you should be focusing on, and why people should be compelled to work with you. And this is, again, where we'll do some competitive analysis to see what else is out there competing for the time and attention of the people that you want to serve, as well as what you're actually doing and who's doing comparable work to what you're doing. If that's applicable or not, I'm not sure, but we will find out. The competitive analysis. The competitive analysis is going to show you what you do best, what other people do best, and what you may or may not want to continue doing at all. So really about where are you most competitive, meaning you're amazing and the best, and you definitely have the edge on this. Where can you collaborate to get better benefits, serve your clients better, serve your stakeholders better, and where could you concede some territory? This is a part that's really especially important because when you're creating a minimum viable product, launching it, measuring it, going at it, you're going to want to pare it down to make it as simple as you can because you want to really get that kind of laser pinpointed impact or outcome. So we're going to look at that as well. Trade-offs are hard to make. Nobody likes to do that, really, but it is important to make sure that your MVP is actually viable in the first place, and that it is something that you appropriately should be doing, whereas other people might be more competent or better equipped to deliver a certain intervention than you might be. So competitive edge, ta-da! Now, this is where we get into the exciting part. We're going to lump 3 sections of the mission canvas together with what I call results. It's impacts, outcomes, metrics, and measures. And of course, the measures part is just fit under metrics on the mission canvas itself. So you've got your outcomes first, which I didn't list in order here, so my apologies at my poor listing skills. But outcomes is the individual level change that you would like to see as a result of your program for each of your stakeholder groups. Impact is the global level change that overall you would like for your program or your product or your project to have on the world or on the community or on the system that you're working with. And then, of course, the metrics are how you will know those changes have occurred. So let's say, in my case, when I used to work with homeownership counselor, or when I was a homeownership counselor helping people buy homes, my outcome was this person will have bought a home. All right, that's pretty simple. So when I saw somebody have bought a home, I could also measure upward from that and say we have an impact on our regional economy because we've had 100 people come through our program this year and all of them bought homes that they wouldn't have been able to buy without our help. And now we have had $14 million of economic impact on the community because now I've been able to use this economic multiplier provided by the National Association of Realtors and said times 100, that equals this much money. Per home, it's some $14,000 or whatever. Please don't check my math because I'm totally not really doing math. But you get the idea. So the outcomes on the individual level, impact on a global level. Sometimes the outcomes do feed into impacts, just like I described right now. Sometimes your impacts stand alone, and they're a thing that you actually will measure on its own without respect to individual change. So when we're defining our metrics, this is where we are going to start to look at exactly what is measurable and what we can keep track of. And we're also going to talk about when you will know your program is successful. So whether you actually can ascertain that certain outcomes have occurred or impacts have occurred, which is probably unlikely within a few months because usually those take more time, you will still be able to have some metrics that will define before you launch your program so that you can decide what looks like success to you on the program side. So this could be like the number of people who try it, the number of people who are retained after 30 days, or whatever it might be. So we'll look at that. And then, of course, the measures in this case is where you're going to keep your your metrics, how you're going to keep them, when you're going to report on them, and so forth. You guys are researchers, so this is awesome because it actually makes this part a lot easier to describe. Most people don't naturally kind of take to it, but because you already do a lot of work that's very similar to program evaluation as far as research goes, you're going to be well equipped for this. The one thing you're going to have to probably do mentally is back up a little bit from the rigor that you're used to, because this is going to be a little bit more subjective than probably the work that you typically do in research. So just a kind of heads up on that. It'll be a little bit different than, of course, what you're used to, but as well, it will be at least connected to it in some way. So I think that will be actually really helpful. All right, moving on, we're going to talk about your value claim. Now, this is where, as you launch your product or program, your MVP, you're going to be able to discuss it with the people that you want to engage with it. This is going to be based on how you solve the problems, why you're the best. So everything that we've already done in the mission canvas so far will feed into your value claim. You'll be able to say, we serve these people because they have these problems. We provide this kind of solution by doing this work. My activities are blah, blah, blah. Here's why we're the best to provide that competitive edge. Here's the outcomes and the impacts that we see from this work, or at least that we think we'll see. So that all can be distilled into a value claim that says, we are this group that serves these people doing this stuff because we think it results in this thing. So this is going to give you a really kind of simple way to talk about what you do, why you do it, and how it actually matters in the world. And this will help you to get people engaged in your product and your program, support it, and many different stakeholder groups are going to resonate with it. You may have value claims that are distinguishing between your stakeholder groups. So your community physicians are going to want to hear one thing, and your funders are going to want to hear something perhaps different. So you'll have some time to kind of distill what that might look like for each of your different programs and your MVPs. And we'll go through that as like a whole work, because the communication part of it's going to be really important, because you will have some marketing involved in this in order to get people involved in it. And then, of course, we have revenue and expenses. And I'll have to check in with you guys to see exactly how relevant this part is to you. But it would at least be useful to see what you can expect by way of expense on the different activities and interventions that you're going to try. Because if you do want to make something scalable, we're going to have to make sure that those interventions can be scaled as well, and see if there's a way for us to maximize the value of the work that you're doing and minimize the expense to it. And of course, to see if there's any opportunity for revenue, whether that's additional funders who might be interested in seeing your efforts succeed. One of the cool things about doing minimum viable products as an organization that can receive third-party funds, grant funds, and so forth, is that you can clearly show the value and the results of the program before you even ask for investment necessarily. Or you can use the mission canvas work that you've done to create a proposal to a funder and say, we think this is going to work. We just need $10,000 to do this pilot and see, work us through the build, measure, learn process. And that's another really great way to do it, because then you can kind of get something on the ground and do it, try it, see if it works. And then if it does work, go back to either that same funder or other funders as well and say, hey, this whole project has been so successful and amazing that we see these results are happening. We would like to scale it, and we need $10 million to do it now. So those are the kinds of things that you can do with this sort of work. All right, so that is the full Mission Canvas overview, and I do apologize for cutting out as far as actual internet access goes, but I hope that this part of it has been useful to you. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all have my email address as well as my contact information, my phone number, and we'll be able to set up a way to communicate as you're thinking about this stuff. And what I would like for you to do between now and the next time that we get together is think through your stakeholder groups. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to email me or call me and ask about them. But identify up to 6, but no more than that, stakeholder groups. Ideally, keep it at like 3 or 4, just for the sake of kind of getting through the process. And once you've identified those stakeholder groups, I want you to get some Post-its that align with those different stakeholder groups. So you'll have up to 6 different colors of Post-its that you're going to use, because you will need those for the next process that we're going to go through next time we do a webinar. And just you'll keep that same color coding throughout. So assign your stakeholder groups each a color, and then make sure that you have Post-it notes that align with those different colors, so that you can use them for the rest of the workshops that we're going to do online. So let me know if you have any questions. My email, I'll go ahead and just post it. I'll do it right now because I don't want to forget. I'll add a slide. I should have added this slide before. Contact info. Boop, boop. Sarai at leannonprofit.com and 541-359-9425. All right, and now I will also see, just to make sure that I have internet next time, I'll make sure that I bring some backup. And if you do, again, have any questions, please let me know, and we'll make sure that we get you everything you need to make this really useful and successful. Thanks so much for being involved. I'm really excited to continue working with you guys.